This video is on the introduction to human reproduction. Now obviously this video is going to be quite simple, so it's more for grade 7, 8 and 9 because you'll do all the detail in grade 12. Now firstly, the purpose of reproduction is obviously to make more organisms or more living things of that specific species. And reproduction can be sexual or asexual. So let's quickly look at some of the differences. Asexual reproduction we can see in some plants. This is an example of a hen and chicken plant that forms small little plants at the end of long stems that then detaches and form baby plants on their own. Now you don't need two parents for this, you only need one plant. You even see asexual reproduction in small little unicellular organisms like this little animal which is called an amoeba. It reproduces by simply splitting into two. So again, you only need one parent, you don't need two. This table gives a really easy summary and a comparison of the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. So as we just learned quickly, asexual reproduction needs only one parent. That means that the offspring are identical to the parent and to one another, and you don't need gametes. Now, gametes are what we know are usually called sperm and ovum. The sperm will have to fertilize the ovum in order to have offspring. So for asexual reproduction, that's why no fertilization will occur. Now, on the other hand, if we look at sexual reproduction, we know that there we need two parents, because the offspring are actually 50-50 mixture, combination of the parents' genetic material. The parents obviously will form gametes, so sperm and ova, and therefore fertilization will need to take place. So there's a big difference between asexual and sexual reproduction. In summary, sexual reproduction will have two parents that produce gametes. In a male, it'll be sperm, and in a female, it'll be an ovum or an egg cell. So the time during one's life cycle when the body starts changing to become sexually mature and produce sperm and ova is called puberty. So the changes that occurs in the human body is described in, or nicely summarized in this table. In boys, it happens between 9 and 14 years, and in girls, it starts between 8 and 13 years. Now, in both boys and girls, there's a gland in the brain called the pituitary gland, which starts secreting hormones. Now, that causes the testes inside the male's body to start making testosterone, and in a girl, in females, estrogen will start being produced by the ovaries. Now, there will be secondary sexual characteristics that develop or visible changes in the body that can be seen. So for boys, for example, we'll have muscle development, more facial and body hair, increased size of their larynx, so that's why their voices change. And then obviously the testes matures, at the penis enlarges, and sperm production starts. In girls, the ovaries that start producing estrogen will cause the development of the breasts, also a bit of more body hair. The girl's hips will usually widen, the pelvic bones increase in size and become more layered in fat, so their hips look a little bit rounder. The ovaries and uterus will also enlarge and mature, and very importantly, menstruation starts occurring. Puberty can be found in your textbook between page 38 and 39. So let's start with the male reproductive system. There's a detailed picture like this in your textbook, but please be able to only label this picture with the names of the parts and their functions. You will never be expected to redraw it. And then all the parts and their functions are actually summarized in this table of your textbook as well. But let's use a different picture than the one in your textbook so that we can look at the parts mentioned in the table. So the first part mentioned is the penis. Now the penis is used to place the sperm inside the female body. We also find the testes. Now the testes is where sperm is produced. It also makes a hormone called testosterone. The vas deferens is the sperm duct, or which is just a fancy name for the word tube, that carries the sperm from the testes towards the penis. Now, if you look carefully, you'll notice that both the penis and the testes is actually found outside of the body. And the reason for that is that the testes is covered or surrounded by a special skin called the scrotum. And it's found around the testes so that it can shrink or relax and actually move the testes closer or further away from the body, because the temperature of the testes needs to be slightly lower than body temperature, because that's the most suitable temperature for sperm to be formed. We also find various male glands inside the reproductive system that releases a fluid that actually contains food to feed the sperm. In the textbook, you'll notice there's a section on circumcision, page 41, but please don't study all the detail there. You can read through it, but if I ask anything about circumcision, it will be a case study based question. In other words, I'll give you text to read on circumcision, and then you answer questions about it. So don't learn it in detail. So now that we've completed the male, let's look at the female reproductive system. Now, these are the parts that make up the female reproductive system. It's basically the vagina, the uterus, the ovaries, and the fallopian tubes. Now, you'll notice in brackets the common English words that we use for these terms. But I prefer you to learn the proper biological words, because you'll be looking at these and using these all the way up to grade 12. The female reproductive system basically has only two functions. The first one is to make ova, the plural word for egg cells. And also then secondly, to provide a place for the baby to grow during pregnancy. Your textbook provides a table like this, which nicely summarizes the name of each of these parts and what it does, what their functions are. But let me explain them individually. Now, I know this picture looks a little bit different to the one in your textbook, but it's got the same parts. This large organ that the arrow is pointing to is called the uterus. Now, commonly that's known as the womb. It's about the size of a clenched fist, the four fingers of the clenched fist. And that is where the baby will grow. It's made up of a muscle, really, so it's actually able to stretch quite big during pregnancy, which is not painful at all. It's normal. This organ is called the vagina, or commonly known as the birth canal. Now, that's a muscular tube that opens from the uterus to the outside of the body. It receives the penis during intercourse, commonly known or biologically known as copulation, but it also allows for the birth of the baby. So that's how the baby will move from the uterus to the outside through the vagina or the birth canal. Now, in this picture, that little structure at the top there is called the ovary. Now, obviously, because this is a side view of the female reproductive system, you can only see one. But if you look at page 42 of your textbook, you'll see a woman actually has two ovaries, one on the left and one on the right. And that is where, this is the organ that makes the egg cells. Remember, we call an egg cell an ovum. And a woman will only make one egg cell each month, so just one. But the ovary is also responsible for making the hormone called estrogen, the female hormone, that you'll remember when we learned about puberty is responsible for making a little girl become sexually mature. The tube that connects the ovary to the uterus is called the fallopian tube, or the oviduct. Now, that tube or oviduct or fallopian tube actually carries the ovum or the egg cell from the ovary to the uterus. Now, if sexual intercourse or copulation occurs, that is in this tube, the fallopian tube, that the sperm will meet the egg cell and fertilization occurs. Otherwise, there's no fertilization. There's tiny little hairs inside this fallopian tube that moves the egg along, that moves the ovum along this tube. Now, each month, only one egg or ovum is released from one of the ovaries. And the path that this egg takes, or this ovary takes, is from the ovaries all the way through the fallopian tube towards the uterus. Now the uterus will be preparing for a pregnancy, and this is what causes a girl to have a menstrual cycle. So if you look in your textbook, you can see the menstrual cycle explained very briefly on page 44 and 45. Now this diagram actually summarizes the menstrual cycle. So the average girl has, or average woman has, a menstrual cycle of 28 days. Now on day 1, now that doesn't mean necessarily it's the 1st of Jan or the 1st of April or the 1st of the month, but we call in the cycle her day 1, the day that she starts menstruating. Now you'll know that we also call that she's having her period. During menstruation, the uterus lining on the inside breaks down and moves through the vagina outward, out of the body, by bleeding, and that is what we call menstruation, or having your period. That takes anything from 3 to 5 days on average. Now, about 2 weeks later, on day 14, once the bleeding has long gone stopped, the girl now will produce an ovum. Now, if copulation or intercourse occurs during ovulation, when there's an ovum available, fertilization could happen and pregnancy will follow. Then obviously menstruation is not going to happen for the following 9 months, which means a girl does not have her period when she is pregnant. But if copulation does not occur, the girl does not have intercourse, you're obviously going to have no fertilization, no pregnancy, and then she will have her period like normal. I might in an exam or an assessment ask you a diagram like this, the timeline of the menstrual cycle, and then just say fill in the blanks. So A would be menstruation, B would be ovulation, that happens on day 14. And then if copulation occurs, there will be fertilization, there will be pregnancy, and no menstruation will follow. The process is often shown or illustrated with a diagram like this one that you can see on page 45 of your textbook. Now again, you'll only be asked to interpret this. I won't ask you to redraw it. And basically what it shows is the thickness of the inside lining of the uterus as it changes between day 0 and day 28, where in my previous timeline I said actually day 1 and day 28, but that's irrelevant. Then lastly, on page 47, you'll find a passage on contraception, and in activity 10, please draw a line through that. That's detail that we'll be doing in grade 12. So all of the best for the exams.